Good afternoon and good evening, everyone. I can see almost 48 participants are already in our meeting. Allow me to share a small introduction of our seminar series. So, this seminar series is inspired by various perspectives on artificial intelligence, which we will call AI for short going forward, and its transformative potential, which was presented in a recent perspective article by Professor Yogesh Dwivedi and his co authors in 2019. AI offers transformative potential for the augmentation and even potential replacement of human tasks and activities within a wide range of industrial, intellectual, as well as social applications. The pace of change with AI has been staggering, with new breakthroughs in algorithmic machine learning, autonomous decision making, creating new opportunities for continued innovation. The impact of AI, it can be very wide ranging across industries and sectors such as agriculture, finance, healthcare, manufacturing, retail, supply chain, logistics, utilities, all could be potentially disrupted by AI. So, this seminar series is on the digital future for business and society, perspectives on AI challenges and opportunities. And this is actually a series of 15 seminars. Today's is the second one of them, and it will present various perspectives from a number of leading expert speakers to highlight the opportunities and challenges posed by the rapid emergence of AI. The host institutions are Swansea University and SIBM Pune. And we have great pleasure in welcoming Professor Yogesh Dwivedi. Professor Yogesh is a professor of digital marketing and innovation. He is also the founding director of the Emerging Markets Research Center and co-director of research at the School of Management, Swansea University, Wales, UK. He is currently leading the International Journal of Information Management as its editor in chief, and his research interests are at the interface of information systems and marketing. Our second co-host for the day is Professor Ramkrishnan Raman, who most of you know. So Professor Raman has more than 18 plus years of work across corporates, Godrej and Boyce, as well as institutions like the Vellore Institute of Technology, Kohinoor Group, Carleton University Sprott School of Business, Canada, SP Jain Institute of Management, Symbiosis Center for Information Technology, which he led for more than 3.5 years, and since 2014, Director SIBM Pune. He's also Dean, Faculty of Management. His research interest areas are also in information systems, information security, IT strategy, and digital marketing. Allow me to now spend a few minutes introducing our speaker for the day, Vasileios Galanos. So the title of today's speech or today's talk is The Interplay of Expectations and Expertise in the Construction of AI, Insights from Historical, Sociological, and Political Groundings. And our speaker for today will be Vasileios Galanos, who is based at the Science, Technology and Innovation Studies subject group at the University of Edinburgh. He is currently finishing his doctoral thesis and must be incredibly busy doing that. He investigates the role of expectations and issues of expertise in the R&D, policy making, history, and public portrayals of AI and robotics. His other academic interests include cybernetics, information science, and media studies. He holds degrees in librarianship and information systems, information science, and cultural dissemination and science, technology, and innovation studies. And he has published in various journals. So, Vasileios, welcome to our seminar, and the floor is all yours.
I am incredibly honored for this wonderful introduction. I will try and share my screen. So the PDF version. And I will also try and... turn off
Yes.
my camera so that I save bandwidth, just in case. I presume you see my screen, my full screen now?
Yes.
This is excellent. Yes, thank you very much for introducing my title. Indeed, I am writing up my PhD at the moment. I'm also part of a student-led group called AI Ethics and Society in Edinburgh, and we also host bi-weekly meetings. So it could be very fruitful to exchange information afterwards. I can share more information later on. I'm also part of the network of scholars investigating the interplay between society, technology, and science called the Institute for the Study of Science, Technology, and Innovation, based in Edinburgh. And today, I am going to bombard you with information, as all PhD students do. What my talk is basically a patchwork of various projects I've been working lately. Some of them have been published, some of them are parts of my upcoming thesis. Um, so, um, Two carry home messages, two spoilers to guide you through the mess I'm going to introduce you to. Think not once, not twice, but thrice before you trust anyone's claims on AI, including myself. And too much focus on the distant future of AI is probably dangerous. So I'm going to offer a slightly heretic view on the futures of AI. And I am glad that this seminar series is based on the futures of AI, because I always try now to be the critical point of view, the balancing force that tries to foster responsibility in the during too much focus on futures. So my main guiding questions, what I try to give answers to. I'm not saying that I satisfy the answers to the questions, but I try to make people think about it. Is that I'm asking whether these grandiose, big, positive and negative expectations in AI have impact on research, governance, public perceptions. How do they do that? And who is entitled to be a spokesperson of AI? Whom do we ask if we want some good opinion about AI? Do we ask an engineer, a mathematician, a roboticist, a psychologist, a philosopher, a journalist? Whom do we ask? When I started reflecting on these questions around 2015, 2016, when I was applying for a PhD, there wasn't much empirical research. So I started doing mine. By the time I'm finishing now, there are more people who have been investigating similar questions. So we build a network of similar findings or slightly different findings. So this makes my research quite interesting. On the back of my slide, you see one of the failed robotic experiments funded by DARPA. You can, if you want to have some laugh about the future of AI, you can search on YouTube DARPA challenge, DARPA robotic challenge, and you will see the state of the art in current robotics, AI robotics. We'll begin with a short anecdote, a little story from Edinburgh. So here in Edinburgh, we've got three main universities, three big universities. One of them is Heriot-Watt University, where they do have a very good robotics department. And they wanted to test one of their supermarket assistants. They developed a supermarket assistant, and they reached out to a big local supermarket called Margiotta, and they said, "Can we test the robot?" In a week's time, the robot didn't do very well. The customers were slightly scared, frustrated because the robot couldn't give good instructions. And eventually the owners of Margiotta basically called the university people, and they said, "Can you pick up this robot, please? It scares away the customers." When this happened, a journalist was there. They covered up the event. The local newspaper had a friendly title, Margiota Shopper Say Farewell to First Robot Worker. But then you know how internet online journalism works. Once the news is out from a local newspaper, it's been picked up by a slightly larger newspaper. So just an hour later, you could see at the Telegraph, Fabio the robot sacked from supermarket after alarming customers. To say that it's sacked, it means that the robot has consciousness. It's like a human being. Then a few hours later, the Times store fires robot server Fabio for pushing shoppers' buttons. And then just a few hours time, robot working in a supermarket fired with capital letters after a week as it scares human customers by the Mirror. It's a very big newspaper. A week later, I did some more research and I found that even a channel called African News on YouTube covered the same story. So this was an example of the hype, of what we call the hype. So I started to unpack the situation. So I already outlined you some of my research questions. This talk will revolve around some conceptual remarks. We need to keep in mind that whenever we investigate technology sociologically, we need to keep in mind that there are some technical operations. The technology does some things, obviously, has some certain properties, and we need to be well aware of those properties and the concepts surrounding the technology. But we need to be very well aware of the social narrative because AI carries lots of narrative and all technologies carry some sort of narrative. So these two need to be taken into consideration. So I will speak about what I call the phenomenon of artificial intelligence does not exist. I will try to unpack and deconstruct the concept of artificial intelligence. I will show that in some ways it does exist. It does exist historically. People have been researching it. I will introduce you to my concept of the expanding experts and people who are trying to make benefit out of the hype around AI and the expertisers, those who tease expertise all the time and who try to take advantage of AI, and how extreme expectations, very positive, very negative expectations, images from the future shape current developments. All in all, AI represents the fear for the unknown, hence the images I have tried to sprinkle my boring slides with. But I suggest that there is nothing really new in AI as it is, and that we should focus on the known. I'm very glad that many people in this, the hosts of this seminar series come from information technologies, and for people who study information technologies, AI isn't but a development, a further development of these technologies. It's nothing so scary as many people wish to think. I won't bore you with my methods, although if we have any PhD students in the audience, they're free to pop questions in the chat, and I can tell more later. But I've taken interviews. Mostly my research is guided by interviews with experts, with people who develop AI according to their websites. And I've also been informed by document analysis of either policy documents or technical documents, manuals. I've been collecting, I have a personal collection of vintage AI related books. So I've tried to capture historically how hypes have been developing. I will bombard you with some theory. I think Yogesh has published before a book on the importance of theory in information technologies, and how we basically lack theory, and new scholars don't know where to look when they are looking for theory. So what I do is called sociology of expectations or sociology of promise. It's been a patch of different scientists, social scientists who who basically focus on the fact that expectations are performative. To have an expectation does something to the development of your ideas. Very often we have informal promising, we have bets, especially when you have in-person conferences and you have these moments when you go out to take some coffee. You know, there is some scholar who will talk to you and without providing any evidence, they will say, well, I'm sure that in 20 years this will happen. And you take that scholar's word very seriously. It stays in your subconscious, in your unconscious. And then this is in a sort of herd behavior dynamic. Expectations become more rigid and solid. There is a sort of fetishization of the new. Whenever something appears as new, it inspires us, it scares us. Computer science, artificial intelligence is always like that. There's no way to think of computers as something old, at least not so far, at least not something very, very new really appears. My main problem with sociology of expectation so far is that it focused only on positive expectations and promised requirement cycles. With artificial intelligence, we have a curious interplay of very positive and very negative expectations. This creates a tension, a dynamic, which is more peculiar. I know that many people here are doing marketing, so you will probably recognize the graph on the right, the Gartner hype cycle. I believe that for many marketing business analysts, this is something like a holy symbol. It started in the late 90s. It's been proven to be very effective. So any new technology starts as a trigger. There is a moment of hype when everyone tries to catch up with it. Then this is followed by tentative disillusionment when we realize that technology cannot deliver what is initially promised. And then we have sometimes in some technologies, we have the so-called trough of enlightenment, where we realize what the technology can do, and then we have a sort of tentative closure. Although this happens, and indeed Gartner has been quite successful in doing that, a critical version of that says that because of the initial success of Gartner's hype cycle, it created a promise requirement cycle, that any technology works like that. But for example, an interesting question would be to look at Gartner's hype cycles every year and look at the trough of disillusionment and see which technologies didn't make it to the enlightenment trough, and why didn't they make it? And if we do so, then we see many political underpinnings underneath. The other scheme I have on the left, which is more sort of guiding my research, is called the certainty trough, or according to other people, the uncertainty trough. It's a qualitative diagram, despite the fact it looks like a quantitative one. So on the left side, you have the uncertainty of the expert. The person who constructs technology knows what can go wrong. So their uncertainty is relatively high. Whenever I ask people who work with AI, what will the future of AI be? They are not so certain when they speak about it, because they know that AI is very much dependent on many different factors, such as funding. On the very right of the diagram, you see the uncertainty of the public or of the user, of the person who is not directly involved with the technology. So if I go out to a cafe in non-lockdown circumstances, and I speak to a random person waiting at the queue about my research, they will be very uncertain about AI, much more than the person who engineers it. But in between, we have the intermediaries. We have people who make advertisements. We have people who have some benefit from the idea of AI, and their uncertainty is very low. Their certainty is very high. So we have rhetoric, we have people who speak with certainty about AI. AI will do this in 10 years' time. It is sure that this will happen. Well, these people usually don't have, they have never coded any line of code in their life, most probably. So certainty is a weird, is a tricky concept. Um, One final bit of theory before I proceed with my analysis of AI. Um, this is where the expertise is further analyzed. So until roughly the 60s, in STS, our colleagues in Cardiff, Harry Collins and Robert Evans developed this theory that roughly until the 60s, there was a definitive line separating the people who know and the people who don't know, the expert and the layperson. But during the 60s, pretty much, when HIV activists played a role in shaping knowledge about health, when democracy in science started to be more ubiquitous, the boundaries shifted and the public could inform science. And then Collins and Evans in 2002, they published an article and they said that, well, now everyone has become an expert in something, and this might be dangerous. So they said that we need to reserve some pockets of expertise to make sure that some science is kept intact. Of course, we need to have some interplay between the needs of the public, the needs of the users in the shaping of science and technology, but we also need to make sure the credentials of the person we are referring to when we do science have to be somehow official in a sense. My problem with it is that it just checks for the vertical relationship between expert and non-expert, but it does not check for expertise across disciplines. So my concept of the expanded expert, and I will talk more about it later, is the person who is expert in one field. So for example, I am an expert, say in healthcare, and I know a lot about healthcare, and all of a sudden I begin to talk to people who don't know about science, about physics. How much do I know about physics? They think of me as a scientist, the scientist in some sense, but they don't know that I know nothing about physics. I only know about healthcare. So this is the expanding expert, the person who uses their expertise in something to be a spokesperson of other fields of expertise. So these are my two coins, the expanding expertise and the extreme expectations. And I will begin with some conceptual, contextual, and historical questions around AI. Once a constructivist, always a constructivist, as my spiritual guide, Wiebe Biker, says, AI, before the coinage of the term, has a very long history. We see that in mythology, we see that in Finnish mythology, such as in Kalevala, we see it in ancient Cyprus, Pygmalion and Galatia, ancient Greece, in Judaic mythology, the golems. We see it in novels such as, or fairy tales such as Geppetto's Pinocchio, Mary Shelley's Dr. Frankenstein's monster. Karel Čapek's Rossum's Universal Robots was a theatrical play that gave its name to robotics. And all this, according to Solosi 2017, express the fantasies of being superseded or devoured by one's progeny. Usually what we see is that the humans create something that looks like a human, and eventually that thing becomes better. So this is very true nowadays when we speak about AI taking away our jobs and the unemployment fears and so on, or the projection of human anxieties for an extremely rational and mechanized self, and the irrational violence of domination and control, or the fear of the mad scholar. So these are the fears we get with drones and the use of AI technologies in warfare and these kind of futures. Post 2010, we had a resurgence of AI robotics related films. This is very telling of the hype nowadays. When I started doing my research, I asked my interviewees, what is AI? Just like that, I pretended I knew nothing, that I read nothing, and they gave me very different answers. So even the experts have a very different understanding between each other about the concept of AI. And what I often say in my talks is that we use the word AI, we never say artificial intelligence. If we said artificial intelligence each and every time we say AI, there would be some greater magnitude in the word. So I try to unpack artificial intelligence, and I say that artificial intelligence does not exist. Why? Basically because intelligence has been criticized by cybernetics. Cybernetics is the parent of artificial intelligence, and also criticized by social science, which has criticized the concept of the artificial. From cybernetics, we learned that cognition, intelligence is mainly a property of the system. You cannot have intelligence in a single brain, in a single machine, in a single item. Intelligence is a property of interaction. Once again, all these can be expanded to separate talks. I can talk all day about this. From social science, we have learned that the concepts of nature, nurture, nature, culture, natural, artificial, physical, and technical are very much socially constructed. Usually, nature and culture are two, or natural and artificial are two terms that are used by different cultures to separate different things. I can say you're an artificial person. That means that you're very shallow and that you don't know what you're doing. Or I can say artificial intelligence, which is some sort of advanced intelligence. From synthetic biology, we have learned, as my colleague Jane Calvert wrote, that an important aspect of how we understand natural rests on what we oppose to it. So whenever we say artificial intelligence, it's important to think, what do we mean by natural intelligence? And again, we don't have a good definition of intelligence to focus on that. But now that we are done with these conceptual remarks, AI has a history as a scientific field. These four people have been considered the pioneers of AI because they wrote together a proposal for a summer research project in artificial intelligence in 1955. This took place in 1956. John McCarthy, Marvin Minsky, Rochester, and Claude Shannon, whom you probably know from information theory. And the fun fact is that I found a video containing an interview of McCarthy, and he is asked, about the concept of artificial intelligence and why did he choose this term. And he said, we just needed something fancy to attract funding for a summer school. So this is why we have artificial intelligence. We have all this big, impressive narrative surrounding artificial intelligence. And now this had significant implications because Marvin Minsky and McCarthy and his colleagues basically said that in one summer, we'll be able to solve the problem of intelligence. They couldn't, of course, but in 1966, they attracted big funding, $2 million in 1963 currency to basically oppose the Sputnik program in Russia. Now we begin to see how DARPA, or back then ARPA, played an important role in that. So this is the politics of artificial intelligence. We begin to see what it's all about. But then this created a sort of legacy of schools in artificial intelligence. The good old-fashioned AI, GOFI, what Minsky and McCarthy spoke about, was about many-step inference by serial process using modest amounts of information involving a relatively small number of strongly correlated variables. This, in simple language, means that you break down your task into small steps and you try to imitate that using computer language. Many people think that machine learning is something new, that it's the latest advancement of AI. This is not true. Machine learning, or the perceptron, again, advanced by people from the 60s, Rosenblatt, and then further criticized, but also advanced by Minsky, basically says that you need many parallel processors to take advantage of available data and see patterns. So this is the alternative school. And what people are very excited at the moment about is the possibility of connecting those two. So what we call rational thinking, I break my process into steps, together with statistical reasoning out of experience, being combined into a contextual application of thinking. Good old-fashioned AI failed basically because this step-by-step process, the idea that everything in the universe can be very precisely described, is an old Cartesian idea, but we learned the hard way through different sciences, through different disciplines, that you can't really describe anything so precisely. The same concept based on different cultures can have many different meanings. Many from the social sciences, from politics, from economics, we learned that there is ambiguity of interests. So the very same thing that I describe is very different to you because your interests are different, your political agenda is different. From Gestalt psychology and psychoanalysis, we learned that rational decision, what appears as rational, is often guided by our instincts, by our survivability modes. And from quantum physics, we learned that objects are unstable. They exist in this sort of wave particle thing. So they can't really be described in such precision as the early AI people thought. And we learned that cognition has to have a body, has to be part of a social context, is probably extended. What I say now, my cognition extends to your cognition without me having powers of telepathy, but just by dialogue, by conversation. And this participation is the thing that generates thinking. If you isolate anything, machine, human, or whatever, they won't flourish. However, these early people gave grandiose prophecies. In 1958, some rivals of Minsky and McCarthy published a paper. Rivals, not in the very harsh way. They've been participating at the same conferences, but they were competing in terms of attracting funding and so on. So Simon and Newell wrote a paper that said that in 10 years' time, we'll have a digital computer to be the first world chess champion. Computers will create and solve unsolvable mathematical problems, will create works of art with considerable aesthetic value, that will replace psychologists by machines. Now, some of these things have been accomplished, say, in the 90s, in 2010, but not in 10 years. So the money they attracted was basically spent in nothingness. And this created big disillusionment. Now there's people in the UK know of this story more, and I will spend a couple of minutes talking about it. This is Sir James Lighthill. He was the chair of Lacasian mathematics, and he belonged in this sort of peculiar lineage of Lacasians who criticized attempts at artificial intelligence. So Lighthill was commissioned by the UK government to write a report on artificial intelligence, and he dumped artificial intelligence. He wrote an extensive report about how artificial intelligence was unable to deliver its promises in 1973. And this had severe impacts on AI research. Many researchers had to move, to change their positions, to go to different countries. And another ex-Lacasian, Stephen Hawking, was also criticizing AI in the recent years. I will return to this soon. At the same time, people who have been criticized about the undeliverability of their promises, they suffered from interdepartmental rivalry. So people in AI used to compete within their departments about, no, this is my right way of doing AI. No, this is my ideal way of doing AI. And this sort of destroyed AI for a few years. This created the first round of disillusionment. Then in the in the mid 80s, we had the second wave, the second round of hype, which took place in different countries. Japan was the first who initiated the 5th generation computers program. They came up with big promises. This basically scared the Americans, who responded with the Strategic Computer Initiative program, again funded by DARPA. And in the UK, we had the knowledge-based expert systems program, or the ALVI program, which was heavily funded. In Europe, we had the ESPRIT program. But the interesting thing in Europe and the UK was that, according to my interviewees, I've interviewed some people who lived through these rounds of hype. Back then, they say we weren't allowed to use the word AI because of Lighthill, because of the AI winter thing. So we had to invent a new name. So expert systems was basically the same technology, diagnosing systems, things that we have now, using statistical reasoning. But we gave promises, but we were unable to deliver them. Now I've been investigating the history of AI. There aren't many books written about it. My PhD contributes a little bit to the history of AI. And the question is this over-promising a form of hubris? When AI people promise a lot, is this some sort of arrogance? Some people have told me it might be a motivational statement. You know, I'm telling you good things, I inspire you, and then we make something out of it. Or maybe we don't, but at least we have motivation. And some other people say that this is some sort of justified exaggeration, that AI wasn't a scientific field, a discipline, so you need to exaggerate a bit whenever you want to establish yourself as a researcher and as a discipline. So it's a question of rhetoric, it's a question of ethics, of morals. How do we use these expectations? This is a diagram depicting the AI winters up until the mid-2000s. This is it begins with the Dartmouth workshop, big hype until the early 70s, Lighthill report, 5th generation computers, and then with the internet bubble in the 2000s, we have a sort of new trough of hype. This is where we live now. Sometimes I make the claim that we might see a third AI winter soon, so that we need to take care. And what Grudin found in this paper that I cite very often is that whenever we have an AI winter, we have a human-computer interaction summer. That means that through the understanding of whether there can be cognition in machines, we understand that there is more in the interface between human and machines. So We had information technologies during the 90s being the predominant hyped thing until eventually we returned to AI. Now, maybe we see a sort of AI being disillusioned again, and we return to affective computing, we return to this ubiquitous computing kind of information technologies. So yeah, I'm often quoting Hubert Dreyfus, longtime critic of AI. Unfortunately, he passed a few years ago, but he speaks about the first step fallacy in AI, that you climb the tree, and because you have managed to climb the tree, you think you can go to the moon. So yeah, there are some successes and undeniable successes in AI, but this does not mean that we can do everything. What changed now, though, the so-called data-driven innovation or data-driven expectations, as I say, is that, well, now we have data. As an interviewee told me, some smart person or group of people added an extra camera to our cell phones, and then we had lots of selfies. And because of selfies, we are able to do better statistical reasoning about facial recognition. And of course, this opens the floor to many, many, many innovations. And we have Twitter, and we have linguistic understanding, and we can have statistical reasoning about how natural language works. But there should be a limit in that, shouldn't there? At least according to Shannon's theories. So yeah, second wave, machine learning, AI. Again, large data sets, interconnected processors, multiple layers of extracting meaning. It's a sort of brute force artificial intelligence. What many people tell me who work with AI is that, well, we spent 20 years learning how to code all these things. Now they tell us just throw data into the many layered system and something magic will happen. And you don't need to know what's going on into the multi-layer system. And it works. And if it works, it works. And if it brings money, it brings money. So that's how they, that's the current state of the art in a sense, at least according to some people I've spoken to. But there might be reasons for potential failure and disillusionment because the world register, the world that we live in, is so complicated. Whenever I make a decision about something, there are so many factors in play, from weather, from the situation in my home, from economic factors, financial factors, psychological factors. It's very difficult to give precise decisions from an AI system which cannot take context into account. In a sense, this kind of reasoning echoes superstitious behavior, sort of magical behavior, that if this happened, then probably this happened. It's a sort of magic causation, and those who know statistics know very well that correlation does not imply causation. Very often we speak of correlations and we think of causations, but it's not the case. So also very often the outcomes of this data-driven processes echo the ideologies or the biases of the world which creates those systems. So we have sometimes what we call racist algorithms and so on. I hate those terms because the algorithms aren't racist. The humans who throw the data into the machines are racist. Some simple examples are, for example, Google show and tell. I quote CADS 2017. It's a great article about the limitations of current artificial intelligence. So these two pictures, historically significant from apartheid, from Palestinian Muslims praying outside a mosque in protest. You know, Google show and tell describes these. You know, Google supposedly knows everything, right? But it couldn't retrieve the information, the correct information, the contextual information about the importance of these pictures. So it understood the praying people as a parking lot because of the visual resemblance, and the white people giving passports to the apartheid people as a crowd of people. So it denies, in a sense, all the historical significance of these pictures. Now, would you trust this system to diagnose you with a disease? Um, and some philosophers say that this returns us into a very behavioristic philosophy, that numbers speak for themselves and that there is no room for emotion. Um, on the other hand, I try to be heretic in my own heresy as well. Uh, I say that sometimes we might be biased against bias. So two scholars I often cite, as you have often seen so far, Toby Walsh and Brian Cantwell-Smith. Toby Walsh says that, well, a large aspect of machine learning is concerned with deciding the most desirable type of bias to give a program. So you cannot have an unbiased machine, right? All machines are biased because ourselves are biased. I know the language that I speak, and I am biased towards this language. If I don't speak, for example, ancient Greek, I will not try to use that language, right? So I'm biased. So the question is, what kind of bias do we want to put into the system, and how do we do it? How do we train the system correctly according to our needs? And you might hear many people talk about explainability in artificial intelligence. And Candlesmith says, well, basically, that's the good dimension of that system, that they don't explain themselves, that you just throw the data into the system and they make a big statistical underlying reasoning, that if you force them to explain themselves, the systems, you will end up with symbolic AI, with step-by-step processing, and this will lead to nonsense, to very long pieces of text that make no sense, because it's trying to explain why I don't like bad weather. Well, I don't like bad weather, but some people do, and it could be an irrelevant question to try to explain why I don't like bad weather. Moving to some political, practical, and psychological questions. So between 2013 and 2019, we have this sort of new type of hype, as mentioned already. You might have read David Willett's Mr. Two Brains policy exchange report, The 8 Great Technologies from 2013, in which he added robotics as a part of the Industrial Challenge Fund, robotics and AI. We had McKinsey sort of saying, oh, you need to catch up with AI now because the numbers will be big very soon. We had experts like Toby Walsh saying, well, by 2062, we'll have full-blown artificial intelligence. And there's this new narrative of, yeah, we were unable to do it in the 70s and in the 90s, but this time we can do it. So there's this sort of promissory environment. Nick Bostrom, philosopher, published a book called Superintelligence. It's a relatively difficult book to read. It's not a very light book, but it became a bestseller, and you could find it at the airport bookstores. You know, to me, this, if you can find a book at the airport, it means that this book is successful. So superintelligence uses a survey. In the first page is the outcomes of a survey where many experts say that at least by 2075 we'll have superintelligence. That is a sort of artificial intelligence which is more intelligent than the human intelligence. Now this book, this survey, this table had a footnote number because the details are not explained in the main text, and you need to go back to the footnotes with the small letters to see how the survey was conducted. And basically, most of the participants at the survey weren't AI experts. Some of them were, and these were the ones who gave the more conservative views that maybe we won't have super intelligence, but most people who gave the answers that we'll have super intelligence and quite soon were philosophers or external people surrounding AI, but not exactly AI people. So this is how hype is created, you know, with it is science, but it's not very honest science, I would say. And something similar happened with Gary Moore. You might have heard of Moore's law in 1960s. In 1965, Irwin Good published a paper called Ultra Intelligence, basically saying the same thing as Bostrom said, heralding the same problems. And you might have heard in the late 90s, early 2000s, the hype about the singularity. All these are interconnected concepts. They differ to a minute detail within each other, but the main idea is that you isolate a factor. So for example, you say that I noticed a difference in the size of turkeys from 2 years ago and now. So that means that if we have larger turkeys now, in 100 years, we'll have massive turkeys in the size of a human, and they will overrule humans. But reality doesn't work like that. Social context is important in these sort of predictions as well. Stakeholders who fund AI-related projects will not care in developing a sort of super intelligence that will dominate humans or something. We don't have the resources and the electricity to run so intelligent beings unless, I don't know, we create some sort of sustainable, ever-creating electricity source. We have climate change, and there are more serious problems to deal with than super intelligence. The other fallacy I often denote as the Megazord fallacy, with an allusion to the Power Rangers series from the 90s, is the Megazord fallacy. So you can think, so in Power Rangers, there was this massive robot controlled by Power Rangers that was the outcome of many smaller robots. So many people think that we have all these small technologies, facial recognition, medical diagnosing, all these little successes in artificial intelligence, what I call low epistemology artificial intelligence. And if you combine them, the outcome will be larger than the sum. So this will be a high epistemology AI if you combine them. But convergence, technological convergence, is the main reason that the second AI winter happened in the 90s, because all these technologies weren't able to converge. At the same time, we had what I call the expertisers, so people who are like social scientists like myself, oopsie, or philosophers who want to use the artificial intelligence currency in their papers, and they want to play with artificial intelligence in their domains and take part in the party. And they are more and more, like every day we see another Future of Humanity Institute, another Future of Life Institute, Center for Future of Intelligence, Center for the Study of Existential Risk, many AI ethics initiatives. All the ethicists come, and with little or no knowledge of AI, they speak about AI ethics. I asked my interviewers about the singularity and these kind of ethical problems. They all used one single word: rubbish. This is all rubbish. And that's why I call it the singular rubbish phenomenon, because it's just, it distorts from actual problems. Again, there is deep political underpinning in it, like in the 80s with the 5th generation program in Japan, when US was competing with Japan. Now DARPA has announced their next campaign on AI. They're recruiting people. They want to combine knowledge in artificial intelligence. They give big promises, and China is the new a player in the game. I have two PhD colleagues, at least two, who investigate the relationship between policy and policy in the US and China. Am I running out of time? I think I'm running out of time. I will.
No, Vasilis, please continue. I think we can go a little beyond time as well. Your talk is incredibly interesting. So I would request you to continue.
Thank you very much, Sandeep. If we need to stop at any time, please let me know.
Will do.
Okay, so moving to the policy thing, I published a paper. I think this was the paper that Yogesh saw initially and invited me to participate in the collated paper. This is where I introduced the concept of the founding expert, and I noticed the sort of movement of expertise between 2014 and 2018. In 2014, people such as Stephen Hawking, physicist, cosmologist, together with Max Tegmark, more of an influencer or futurist, I would say, physicist as well. They published a paper on the Independent, the newspaper, which was followed by a publication without Hawking's contribution, which basically said that the long-term impact of AI might be dangerous for humanity. Just a few days later, Elon Musk, influencer, investor, said something very similar. And all of a sudden, this has been picked up by many newspapers saying that world-leading experts say that AI will be dangerous for humanity and that there is an existential risk. But the thing is, Stephen Hawking was one of my inspirations as a kid. Like I felt very bad that I had to criticize Stephen Hawking about his views on AI. But most of my interviews told me, well, Stephen Hawking is a great scientist, but he didn't know anything about AI. It's as me speaking about geology. I would never speak about geology because I know nothing about geology. Funnily, there is a paper from 2001, published peer-reviewed paper complaining about Stephen Hawking's claims about geology. So Stephen Hawking has been trying to speak about everything. That's why he became a popular icon eventually. So Elon Musk eventually commissioned an open letter to sort of establish some research priorities for robust beneficial artificial intelligence. Stephen Hawking was part of that. It started, so these two names, Hawking and Musk and Hawking, appeared in the news in 2014, 15, all the time about, and they were deeply related with AI. If you said that you're investigating AI to any person at the cafe, they would say, oh, these things that Elon Musk and Stephen Hawking are doing. And you're like, well, no, they don't really do AI. They just talk about it. Stephen Hawking gave a Reddit Ask Me Anything session. So a famous person goes on Reddit and many people ask questions and that person is responding. And Hawking made a similar statement about artificial intelligence. And this was written form. It could be copied and pasted very easily. You could send the links to people. And then I started taking notes of the headlines in newspapers. Top scientists call for caution over artificial intelligence. AI must turn focus to safety. Stephen Hawking and other researchers say AI has arrived, and that really worries the world's brightest minds, and so on. At the same time, we had what we call clickbait articles, such as a robot has passed the self-awareness test. Next stop, world domination. Robot kills Volkswagen factory worker. Of course, these were, the first one was a very old trick. You could do it with any sort of machine from the 50s to make a machine to appear as if it has consciousness. But this is trickery, basically. Consciousness is such a deep thing to have that no such machine can be said to have consciousness. The cognitive scientists I know laugh at these kind of articles. And a robot kills Volkswagen factory worker. Well, this is a factory accident. This is a matter of bad safety measures. But then things became more serious when in 2016, which I call the year of policymaking, the European Parliament prepared a draft report concerned with regulation of AI, which is, according to the report, vitally important for the legislature to consider all its implications. It's interesting that they refer to Asimov's laws of robotics. Isaac Asimov, in his novels in the 60s and 70s, he used a plot device that in the society of the future, when humans will live together with robots, there will need to be some laws regulating the robots. And but this was a plot device. And if you read Asimov, Asimov shows in his novels that the laws fail to work because they lead to contradictions. But the policymakers who tried to make these laws, these regulations about AI, they refer to Asimov, probably without reading the novels. And they took Asimov's novels as policy, which is extremely weird. More Hawking statements. So Hawking back then became a sort of public figure you could invite to make statements about AI. More headlines in the news. A beauty contest was judged by AI and the robots didn't like dark skin. And by October 2016, we had 3 policy documents ready about AI, one from Europe, one from the UK, and one from the US, which was impressive. This was my bread and butter for a year. I opened them, and all I found was references to Stephen Hawking and Elon Musk. It was incredible. Almost no experts in AI took part in the shaping of these policy documents. This sort of justified my PhD. Where are the experts? We should ask the experts. And yeah, at the same time, more Hawking statements. Eventually, there was a resolution that was passed by nearly 400 votes that we need to take sort of safety measures against robotics. More Elon Musk statements. And then, following the Gartner hype cycle and the sort of disillusionment or negotiation of hype thing, I found out that Bill Gates, who gave a very Elon Musk-y kind of statement about AI in 2015, who said that he said on a similar Reddit thread that he's on the same camp with Hawking and Musk, that we should take care of AI. He changed his words completely. And he said that basically AI can mean longer vacation. But nobody noticed that. Nobody noticed that in the media, that the same person basically gave 2 very contradictory statements without referring to his previous statements. There was a mini controversy at the European Parliament between 2 policymakers. One of them said that we shouldn't care about AI. One of them said we should. And then in 2017, slowly some experts began to speak. This is Rodney Brooks, one of the most prominent figures in contemporary AI and robotics, who also takes up the task to write public, sort of public-oriented blog posts about AI and gives interviews and so on. But the percentage of experts speaking about AI is very little. In 2018, we reached sort of stability. This is the House of Commons latest big report on AI. If you haven't read it, I highly recommend you to read it. It's a great text, and it finally takes into account experts, where people are invited to offer interviews. But we had to go through this entire process of messiness. But then once this happened, this allowed me to delve deeper into the experts' minds, what's going on in people's mind. And I understood that there are generational gaps, and that there is a sort of nostalgia in the minds of early AI researchers who speak about contemporary AI being shallow and cheap, and that this is not AI, this is just something else, or younger people who see AI as a way to attract funding. So there is some sort of opportunism. There is this is a way of achieving survivability. So there is this sort of, this is again the higher uncertainty of the expert, who doesn't really care or know about the definitions of AI, as people such as Stephen Hawking and Elon Musk did speak with certainty, but they don't really care about that. They want to attract the funding. In my thesis, I speak a lot about the comparison between curiosity-driven research as opposed to grant-driven research, which is something similar has happened in the past, but we now see it in a more vicious way, because the population is greater now. We have more people competing around AI, and all these personal agendas are in competition. And we have more cynicism. We have people saying, well, if they don't give me money this year, I will move to a different department. Whereas back in the days, it was all about, well, my school of AI says that, and I will defend it until the end of my life. I will stay in the same school. This has impacts in practical settings, though. As I promised in my abstract, this is part of the latest case study I'm investigating, breast cancer and medical diagnosing, radiology, and you might have heard of the question concerning true positives, false negatives, true negatives in medical diagnosing. So the ideal is to have a true negative. So you don't have cancer, right? If you have a true negative, it means that the system is correct. If you have a true positive, it means that the result is good, but you have cancer. And then with the false positives and false negatives, a false positive, it means you have no cancer, but you think you have because the system said so. And a false negative is that, well, deadly, you think that you don't have breast cancer, but the system says that but you actually have. So this is deadly. So there's a new hype now. These are Google Scholar statistics underneath, showing the citations of articles. So we have one of the latest issues of Nature was dedicated to that. And there was an international evaluation of an AI system for breast cancer screening, which by the time it was published, it very soon received like nearly 200 citations. And it was all positive and hyped about the promissory environment of breast screening. In the very same issue, there was an article much more detailed, dissecting all the details of the system that was presented in the first article, showing all its limitations. But guess what? The more realistic article at the same time had only 6 citations, because if you are not hyped, you don't get the citations. So it was, so many things play into these systems. I can go into details, but for example, the type of the system plays a role, the kind of data you feed into the system, the demographics, the instability and the perturbations within every person's body, The physique of different cultures is very different. So you can't have a very universal system. So a little quiz I often pose when I give this talk to people is, when was this written? And sure, so it's an article about what the radiologists should take care of when they use these medical diagnosing systems. And the author says that we need to ensure that the radiologists develop the correct understanding of the system scope and function, that prompting information is being used appropriately, and we need to understand how the radiologist's use of the system changes over time as they learn about its behavior and adapt their procedures. And given that I don't have visual contact with people, I will give you the answer. Oh, I don't have it as a slide here, but it was written in 1999 when medical diagnosing systems were again very much hyped. And I think it's very likely that we're going to fall in the same sort of disillusionment, and we'll need the same sort of, this is a recent article basically stating the same things in a more fancy diagram, that we need to take care and be aware of the full cycle of the system, the developer of the system, the user of the system, the patient data, how we store the data, how we use the system, and this is a sort of eternal cycle. To conclude, all these dimensions I referred to, the generational gap, the question of expertise, the concept of artificial intelligence and what it is, the question of small expertisers, all these interact with each other in different ways. I try to make this sort of hexagram type of diagram where I showed how every point I made basically connects to another, and this creates the messiness of the system. But we can survive if we are aware of all these factors that are in play. There are conceptual factors, political factors, individualistic factors, technical factors that we need to take care of. Some questions, open questions for future research. We need to question how much has changed 46 years after the first AI winter. How much actual technological development we have. We need to be aware about contemporary over-promising. When people speak about the future, can we see what are the effects of that? We need to be alert. Is there a case of a new AI winter? How to avoid it? We need to be aware that hype is misdirecting from actual factual challenges and opportunities. I used to say, let's make unhype the new hype, but I realize now that unhype is actually hype, and this is also dangerous. So if you see people who are saying there's nothing new at all in AI, distrust them too. They also serve some sort of individual agenda. So some hype is healthy, but some hype is not. So we need to use the hype towards AI's benefit. We need to foster healthy AI skepticism. This is my proposal to people who like computer science and so on. We need to teach AI history in those departments. We need to investigate AI history, and we need to form a strategic alliance between informaticians, computer science, social scientists, and given the context of this talk, business analysts, industry analysts, but also guiding AI niches between medicine, policy, journalism, fiction. This is the AI Ethics and Society group we are holding at Edinburgh. We have a talk today, actually, in a few hours. These are my colleagues. Thank you very much for your attention. Sorry for running over time, but it was a great pleasure to speak to you. And I will stop sharing my screen. Here I am.
F. Karisto Vasilis.
Thank you very much. Parakalo.
It was an absolutely wonderful talk. It's perhaps the best talk I have heard from a researcher. You blended humor, visuals, which I've never seen in a talk from a researcher. Amazing visuals. In fact, offline, I'm going to ask you the sources of all those pictures which had those retro looks. And superb, absolutely eloquent talk. And what really blew me away was that small line in your UK second report, which said that 40% of all AI companies do not use any AI whatsoever. And it was,
Indeed, indeed. My supervisor often says AI isn't a thing. It's not. And I have some interviews who told me, people speak about an AI, put an AI in your system, but AI is a concept. It's like physics. You can't say put a physics in your system. So there are minor applications. In the 90s, we would call them ICTs. Now we call them AI. So it's interesting to see how these.
yeah, I also liked very much how you dissected the semantics and the actual core and all of the issues kind of surrounding it. And you brought in a new term as well, unhype. Uh, and that's extremely interesting. So thank you very much. There are a whole bunch of discussions which were happening on the chat box between researchers while you were speaking, triggered by what you said. In fact, Annie Tubadji, are you still here with us? Annie Tubadji, can I request you to unmute and ask your question, if you don't mind?
Yeah, hi Vasilis, Kalimera, Kalispera, or whatever it is now considered to be. Very, very interesting talk. I really enjoyed it. I was interested actually in your title. When I first read it, it alluded to me something about construction and deconstruction. And then I was expecting to hear what are the connections that you have with this philosophical approaches, because this will highlight so much the importance of your research question. And then I was wondering to what degree you are tapping on collaboration with other disciplines, because all that you're mentioning about narrative economics and narratives and the limitations of research and what is being hyped or not can be actually related to narrative economics work, which is delving into this unhyping of the narratives and how narratives create the polarization and how it is related to the different. And then I was thinking from economics point of view, because I'm a cultural economist, but mostly in the cultural field. I was thinking that your contribution here, from what we heard, can be very, very relevant to economists with regards to the heterogeneity of the motivations of uncertainty. And this will require really more precise methods. So I think your research can be sold to this audience from this perspective, the heterogeneity of uncertainty. So thank you very much, and all the very best with your work. And also, I didn't understand who is your supervisor.
Thank you very much, Annie. My supervisors are Dr. Jill Haddo and Professor Robin Williams, both from the University of Edinburgh. Many things to unpack. I can give a second talk based on your questions. My relationship with construction and deconstruction. I read plenty of philosophy. I think deconstruction in Jacques Derrida's way of looking at it is probably infiltrated in my view of the world. I enjoy to deconstruct it, but I don't refer to Derrida because I don't make specific use of his theory of deconstruction.
Derrida and also, Wittgenstein, and the way that he was creating the two different realities in his two main, right? And this is exactly a way of your dehyping of stuff. So it is, and then the question will be, will it be dehyped or not? Because the populations that are supporting the two narratives differ in knowledge, the way that you very well underlined this, but also what has to be taken into consideration is the proportion between the two masses. So the people who have the better knowledge are less. And then they may polarize the narrative and drive it, as you're showing with the narrative, with this paper from Nature, right? The paper which was with a poorer narrative was the one that, why this happens? Because of the population which is behind it. On one side, it can be the magical contagion, as you have also fantastic references to behavioral economics and psychological stuff. But not only the prestige of the source, but also the population that will be out there to support the narrative and its diffusion. So that's exactly where you can link very well with the narrative economics.
Maybe the two of you can connect on ResearchGate and LinkedIn and continue your discussions forward.
My short response to that, and I will try and respond to the other questions you made. I will refer to a scholar from Edinburgh who is actually honorary professor at the business school here at Edinburgh, James Fleck, who has coined the term innoffusion, which is innovation which happens through diffusion. So indeed, if we see the hype and hype sort of polarities as a binary, maybe we'll miss a portion of the truth. So what happened with ICTs or with the internet was that when the users made use of the technology, we found very unexpected ways that the technology could be used. And this was being taken up by the innovators and the developers and the designers, and it spoke back to the public. So I think that what we need to do now is to wait and see the midterm, not long-term nor short-term effects of AI applications. And this could be fed back into the loop of innovation. So we need to wait for this technology to diffuse a little bit until we take back the message towards innovation. But it needs some patience. That's what I presume. But of course, we can continue this discussion.
That's right.
Infinitely.
That's right.
You're naturally going to the next question in the chat about the ethics, whether it is ethical to have a polarization on the topic.
Yeah, Annie, if I could request you to continue the discussions further offline, if you don't mind. We've completely run out of time, but there is one last question from Annabel Gutierrez, where she's asked, given the importance of data for AI, do you have any data ethics framework reference that you recommend to look at?
Data ethics framework. There are so many. There are so many frameworks. I cannot think of one, because if I think of one, I think that I will not do justice to other voices. But I think that data ethics, I will recommend one article. It's written by Afra Care. I will pop it into the chat. She's a good colleague from Ireland. Afra Care and colleagues. If you search for performativity expectations, if you search for these terms in Google Scholar, you will find an excellent article in which Afra Care interviews people who work with data ethics and who show and they show how data ethics is currently shaped by expectations. So it's weird to think of data ethics as a source to guide expectations, because expectations themselves guide data ethics. So I shouldn't say that because I have an entire group called AI Ethics and Society, but that's why we focus on the interplay between the societal and the ethical. These are like yin and yang. They shape each other constantly. So I think that the best framework is to think that ethics is performative and is also performed. This is my view on it.
Thank you, Vasilis. We could go on and on. In fact, I wish I could be a fly on the wall and listen to some of your other talks, especially your PhD defense, which must be imminent, right? Or is it over?
It's not over. I'm still writing some chapters.
Okay.
I change my mind all the time about how to phrase certain things.
Okay.
But that's how science works. I
Yes,
believe.
yes, indeed. Indeed.
But I want to thank you again for this wonderful opportunity. I
Our
wish
pleasure.
we keep in touch in person at some point. That I
Shall do.
visit you at Swansea.
Please, please look forward to that. I have actually had the opportunity to visit your wonderful city of Edinburgh. A few years back, I was on a trip to Scotland and to Glasgow, and I took a couple of trips to Edinburgh. A wonderful place for education and university teaching and research.
Absolutely. To be honest, I came here for holidays first, and then I decided I should study here. You're mostly welcome to come back anytime.
Serendipity, serendipity. So great talk. Thank you so much. We still have almost 60 participants with us. At the peak, we had reached 80. So that shows you how interesting your talk was. And like I said, you've been a rare researcher to blend in humor and visuals in a topic that can be quite abstract. So you've kind of sifted the hype from the content. So many thanks. Look forward to staying in touch. I would also like to thank all of our participants who logged in and listened to you with great attention. And today's session was made possible by our IT team at SIBM Pune, led by Ragesh Bhagewadi. So he hosted the entire infrastructure for our meeting. So many thanks to he and his team as well. Vasilis, I really look forward to staying in touch and maybe collaborate at other times. Please do join our next talk if possible. It's on the 4th of February. As I mentioned, it's a series of talks that we have. Our next talk will be by Professor Marine Jansen, who is a professor of ICT from Delft University of Technology in Netherlands. It's on adaptive governance for trustworthy AI. That's the topic on the 4th of February. So once again, many thanks. Have a good evening and look forward to